Technology, Physical Security Vulnerabilities, a GAO Undercover Review. I have a few brief remarks before we move into opening statements. Committee members and staff just viewed 3 short videos produced by GAO. At the request of the Department of Commerce, these videos have been labeled law enforcement sensitive, which means the agency has determined that they contain sensitive but not classified information. I remind members that while they may ask questions today concerning GAO's investigation, witnesses may respond that there are answers that can only be addressed in a closed, non-public setting. Please be mindful of this fact here today. I would like to instruct the witnesses to answer to the best of their ability, but should an answer call for sensitive information, it may be addressed when we move into executive session at the end of the hearing. We will now vote to authorize the subcommittees to enter into executive session at the end of the hearing.
Mr. LaHood.
Pursuant to House Rule 11G2, I move that upon completion of all present members' questions under the 5-minute rule, the remainder of the hearing be closed to the public because the disclosure of the testimony to be heard may compromise sensitive law enforcement information. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. LaHood.
Yes.
Mr. LaHood votes aye. Mrs. Comstock. Mrs. Comstock votes aye. Mr. Lucas. Mr. Holtgren. Mr. Posey. Mr. Massey. Mr. Knight. Mr. Loudermilk.
Aye.
Mr. Loudermilk votes aye. Mr. Abraham. Mr. Webster. Mr. Banks. Yes. Mr. Banks votes aye. Mr. Marshall. Aye. Mr. Marshall votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Aye. Mr. Higgins votes aye. Mr. Norman. Aye. Mr. Norman votes aye. Mr. Byer. Aye. Mr. Byer votes aye. Mr. Lipinski. Aye. Mr. Lipinski votes aye. Ms. Bonamici. Ms. Bonamici votes aye. Mr. Barra. Ms. Esty. Ms. Esty votes aye. Ms. Rosen. Mr. McNerney. Mr. McNerney votes aye. Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Chairman, 12 members voted aye, no members voted nay. Mr. Perlmutter votes aye. 13 members voted aye, no members voted nay.
There being 13 ayes and 0 noes, the motion is agreed to. Once members have finished their questioning under the 5-minute rule, the clerk will clear the room. Only members of Congress, their staff, and the witnesses may remain in the hearing room. At this time, I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Again, good morning and welcome to everyone to today's joint subcommittee hearing titled NIST Physical Security Vulnerabilities, a GAO Undercover Review. Today we intend to discuss and evaluate GAO's report on its assessment of the physical security program at NIST, the public version of which is being released in conjunction with this hearing. We will hear from GAO about the questions it sought to answer in undertaking its assessment, as well as the methods it used to assess the current physical security program at NIST. We will also look at GAO's findings and the recommendations it has made with respect to the physical security program and the steps NIST management must take to satisfy these recommendations and fortify its physical security. Finally, as part of today's hearing, we will examine specific instances where physical security at NIST has failed. Specifically, an explosion that occurred in July of 2015 at the NIST campus in Gaithersburg, Maryland, which was caused by a security officer's attempt to illegally manufacture methamphetamine inside a NIST laboratory and served as a catalyst for the committee's investigation of physical security at NIST. However, before we get to that discussion, in light of transparency, I would like to describe briefly for the public what occurred during the closed portion of today's hearing. Prior to gaveling into this open session, members of the committee examined video evidence of recent physical security breaches at NIST campuses. These videos, captured as part of GAO's covert vulnerability testing, reveal NIST employees failing to adhere to established physical security policies. One video in particular shows an undercover GAO agent subverting detection by security personnel by employing very basic espionage techniques. The evidence produced in these videos shines a light on the porous nature of NIST physical security and are particularly concerning to the committee, especially in light of the fact that the July 2015 meth lab explosion served to put NIST on notice that its physical security program was flawed. While all of this is discussed in the sensitive version of GAO's report, it is discussed only briefly in the public version being released today. And while certain information is undoubtedly sensitive and must remain concealed from those who would use it for nefarious purposes, nothing I just explained rises to that level. In fact, I believe that this information is vital to ensuring that such breaches are prevented in the future at NIST and other federal agencies. Before concluding, I'd like to focus briefly on some positive aspects of GAO's report. Specifically, the report indicates that the Commerce Department agreed with all of GAO's recommendations, which is the first step toward implementation. Additionally, the report emphasized that NIST has taken some steps to further notify and improve its physical security program. Specifically, GAO found that NIST management had 3 independent assessments of its physical security program conducted following the July 2015 incident, and that NIST has current plans to implement new physical security policies and procedures as a result of those assessments. The work that NIST performs is extremely valuable to our nation. From development of the cyber framework to standards used throughout industry and academia alike, NIST's work must continue to thrive. In doing so, however, we must ensure the safety and security of those endeavoring to carry out the NIST mission, just as we must ensure the protection of physical and intellectual assets entrusted to NIST's care. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about the status of these new policies and procedures, steps taken toward their implementation, and what NIST and the Department of Commerce intend to do to carry out GAO's recommendations. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Virginia, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chairman LaHood, Chairman Comstock, for calling this meeting. Thanks for all of you for being here. The National Institute of Science and Technology, Standards and Technology, is a vital federal science agency that for more than 100 years has helped push American innovation in areas as diverse as computer chips, nanoscale devices, the smart electric power grid, and earthquake-resistant skyscrapers. The advanced technologies being developed and pioneer research being conducted at NIST make security of its facilities and technologies critically important. Unfortunately, security at NIST, at both the Gaithersburg, Maryland, and Boulder, Colorado campuses, has been a struggle. As Chairman LaHood pointed out, in July 2015, a NIST police officer attempting to brew methamphetamine in a little-used laboratory on the Gaithersburg campus was injured in an explosion. He was subsequently arrested, fired, and is currently serving a 41-month prison sentence. In April 2016, a non-NIST employee gained access to a secure lab on NIST's Boulder, Colorado campus. In May 2017, a paraglider landed on the grounds of the Colorado campus, and in June 2017, a member of NIST's police force was arrested and charged with first and second degree assault by Frederick County Sheriff's Department in Maryland. Today, we'll discuss the GAO's recent security review at both campuses, and this showed significant issues with NIST's security structure, operating procedures, and performance. Security awareness training for NIST employees should be increased, and the agency's guard force must improve their attentiveness to potential threats. The effectiveness of NIST security procedures must be thoroughly assessed, and a comprehensive communication strategy that can help identify and resolve potential security threats should be implemented. My biggest concern regarding security at NIST is the security structure. It's fragmented, inefficient, and in some cases inadequate. The Department of Commerce oversees the security personnel at NIST who implement physical security policies, for example, while NIST manages access control technologies and other physical security countermeasures. This security structure violates best practices for security, which calls for centrally managing physical security assets and operations. So without a cohesive organizational structure, it seems inevitable that gaps in security will continue to emerge and that the management of NIST security will be inefficient and potentially ineffective. GAO in its review pointed out further problems with NIST security management that we'll hear about, but it's also worth noting the positive stuff, that NIST leadership has made positive commitment to improving security. 75% of NIST staff surveyed by GAO believe that NIST leadership places a great or very great importance on security issues, and this commitment to security is really encouraging. And I expect the leadership of the Department of Commerce and at NIST to work together to fully and quickly address the issues outlined. The science and technology research and programs carried out at NIST help U.S. businesses grow, they strengthen the U.S. economy, and expands our scientific and technical knowledge. So we and Congress and the public expect NIST to not only protect their vital resources and in some cases hazardous materials, but also protect NIST's employees, visiting scientists, and others from physical security risks. I'd like to point out that the acting director, Dr. Kent Rochford, only stepped into this role in January. So thank you for being here today and helping tell us how you plan to address these issues. And finally, I'd like to note my disappointment, the disappointment of our minority team with the Department of Commerce and NIST for the late submittal of the testimony, less than 24 hours ago, despite a 48-hour deadline. And I also confess that both the majority and minority, I think, were surprised that the joint written testimony came from both Commerce and NIST. And perhaps you can talk about that in your testimony. So Chairman LaHood, thank you very much for calling this meeting. Thank you to all of our witnesses, and we look forward to a productive meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. I now recognize the chairwoman of the Research and Technology Subcommittee, Ms. Comstock, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This committee has a strong record of bipartisan support for the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, NIST. NIST promotes U.S. innovation and competitiveness by advancing measurement science, standards, and technology. Today, we'll be discussing a handful of dangerous physical security breaches at NIST's 2 campuses in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and Boulder, Colorado. Unfortunately, this isn't the first hearing we have held on this subject, but we certainly hope it'll be the last, and certainly hope we can identify how we can move forward on improvements. Lack of security at NIST facilities is a direct, serious threat to the safety and well-being of thousands of federal workers, a steady stream of scientists and technologists who visit NIST facilities every day, and sizable populations of people who live and work near the NIST facilities. NIST campus security has been a growing concern to the committee since the July 2015 explosion at NIST's Gaithersburg facility, which revealed a NIST police officer, a former acting chief of NIST police, was operating an illegal meth lab at a NIST building. This event was the catalyst for bringing to light other security breaches at the Gaithersburg campus. Not quite 1 year later, in April 2016, another, no less serious incident occurred in Boulder, Colorado. A man without identification walked onto the NIST campus and was able to enter a building and laboratory where hazardous chemicals were stored. Fortunately, this man wasn't intent on playing around with laboratory chemicals and equipment or causing other damage. He instead roamed about the building and made himself at home. Fortunately, the meth lab at the NIST Gaithersburg campus exploded on a weekend evening. Not that it's fortunate, but at least it was a weekend, when NIST staff and visitors weren't there. But luck does run out. We are going to hear this morning from NIST and Department of Commerce witnesses who will describe steps that were taken to shore up physical security after these 2 incidents. We are also going to hear about the results of a GAO investigation conducted at our committee's request, which reveals that there are still serious unaddressed security problems at NIST Maryland and Colorado facilities. What we are going to hear today from GAO is serious enough that the department may not allow certain details to be included in the public record. NIST must learn from its past and do its best to ensure proper security is implemented, and obviously we all here in the committee want to make sure that's the case. This is critical for the safety of NIST campuses, its employees, visitors, and the surrounding community. It is also important not to jeopardize NIST's mission to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness. Physical insecurity at NIST's 2 locations obviously jeopardize the important work done by the agency. Even more important, what seems to be huge unfixed holes in security threaten the safety and well-being of approximately 3,000 NIST employees, 3,500 visiting professionals, and other government agencies. The safety of our people should be the #1 concern. Safety is certainly the #1 concern for this community. I trust this hearing today will mark the end of the measures that haven't been successful and the beginning of swift, uncompromising action by NIST and the Department of Commerce. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Comstock. I now recognize the ranking member of the Research and Technology Subcommittee, Mr. Lipinski, for his opening statement.
I start by also thanking Chairman LaHood, Chairwoman Comstock, Chairman Smith for calling this hearing, and thank the witnesses for being here. I'll keep this brief as my colleagues have stated many of the issues and concerns that I also have. The National Institute of Standards and Technology is a national treasure. I know of no other agency that has such a widespread impact with so modest a budget. Nobel Prize-winning research, leadership in standards development benefiting every sector of our economy, acceleration of advanced manufacturing on U.S. shores, and improvement of cybersecurity in both the government and the private sector. NIST's leadership in measurement science, in their work in cybersecurity, and so many other important areas of technology is unimpeachable. Today, however, we will learn in some detail about how NIST has not applied the same rigor and discipline to the physical security of its facilities. A new report from GAO being released with this hearing identifies several weaknesses in NIST policies and procedures for physical security. The GAO report further discusses the challenges caused by the fragmentation of oversight of NIST security between NIST and its parent agency, the Department of Commerce. GAO makes a number of recommendations to both NIST and Commerce on how to improve physical security on the two NIST campuses in Gaithersburg, Maryland, and Boulder, Colorado. Those recommendations are not prescriptive. Rather, they lay out or reference a clear process for the development of action plans and timetables to address each identified weakness in current policies and procedures. While it's premature to ask NIST and Commerce for detailed plans, I expect to hear today from them how they plan to proceed in addressing each of GAO's recommendations and what steps they have already taken. I want to thank each of the witnesses for being here this morning. This hearing is not as fun as for anyone as science and technology focused hearings that we're more used to on the Research and Technology Subcommittee, but it's certainly no less important. I take our oversight responsibility seriously, and I believe the agencies before us take their security seriously. I look forward to learning more about the agency's security plans going forward. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The GAO conducted a comprehensive review of NIST physical security posture. They used covert tactics, and they found gaping holes in the agency's ability to protect their campuses. Undercover agents succeeded in breaching numerous checkpoints. Today, I want to thank the GAO for their work. Their findings are alarming and confirmed our worst suspicions. NIST campuses are safes. On July 22, 2015, this committee launched an investigation of NIST security in the wake of a chemical explosion and fire at the Gaithersburg, Maryland campus. On July 18, 2015, the acting chief of the Police Services Group, or PSG, attempted to manufacture the illegal drug meth in one of the NIST vacant laboratories. The local Gaithersburg, Maryland police and fire departments responded to the scene and began a criminal investigation. On January 2, 2016, this high-ranking PSG officer was sentenced to 3.5 years in jail for manufacturing meth. Slowly, we learned that this was only the tip of the iceberg. According to a July 2016 Department of Commerce Office of Inspector General's report, the very officer who caused the explosion on NIST campus also had committed time and attendance fraud by claiming hours that he did not actually work. He was not the only officer engaged in this misconduct. The final straw for the committee was the April 2016 incident in Boulder, Colorado, where an unknown individual was found wandering in a NIST building. After this incident, we contacted GAO and asked them to investigate. While law enforcement personnel have stepped in and handled many of these incidents, and the GAO has disclosed their findings in the department and NIST, I'm not convinced that NIST will actually achieve the necessary goal, a secure NIST compound at Gaithersburg and Boulder. GAO, as I understand it, remains concerned that the Police Services Group and the security structure within NIST has not received proper scrutiny, a concern that is bolstered by the revelation that GAO agents successfully penetrated NIST campuses in 15 out of 15 attempts during their covert vulnerability testing. By the way, that is just incredible. 15 out of 15, not much security there. Now we have a new administration in place, a pending nominee for NIST director, and GAO's recommendations. I urge NIST and the department to work together for comprehensive security reform. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I now yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Ms. Johnson, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. Welcome to our witnesses. I'd like to thank you and Chairwoman Comstock for holding this important hearing on the state of physical security at the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, NIST. NIST has had a number of serious problems with physical security in recent years. A rogue NIST police officer injured himself and damaged a NIST building in Gaithersburg while attempting to manufacture methamphetamines. Additionally, there was a troubling incident of an unauthorized individual wandering around a supposedly secure building at the NIST Boulder campuses. These events spurred the Department of Commerce and NIST to review NIST security practices and attempt to improve physical security at the NIST facilities. NIST requested independent assessment and developed an action plan based on those assessments. Under the current acting director, Dr. Rochford, NIST has continued to focus on improving its security culture. While there may have been improvements to NIST security culture, there appears to be plenty of room for additional improvements. We learned that GAO's just released report that the GAO agents were recently able to gain unauthorized access to areas both at Gaithersburg, Maryland, and Boulder, Colorado NIST campuses. It is particularly troubling that GAO's efforts were so successful even after NIST had taken steps to improve security. I look forward to hearing today from Acting Director Rochford and how NIST plans to respond to the GAO recommendations, including specific corrective actions and approximate timelines for improving and implementing those actions. I look forward to hearing from Ms. Casias about the Department of Commerce's plan to address the bifurcated organizational structure of NIST physical security programs. I would also like to know what actions the Department of Commerce plans to take to ensure NIST security services operate at maximum effectiveness. The protection of federal facilities, employees, contractors, and guests is of utmost concern to me and this committee. NIST specifically has valuable research and technology that must be protected as well. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how NIST security services can better meet its mission. I thank you and yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Let me now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Ms. Lisa Casias, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration at the Department of Commerce. She previously served as the Deputy Chief Financial Officer and Director for Financial Management at the Department. Ms. Casias received her Bachelor's of Business Administration in Public Accounting from Pace University. Our second witness today is Dr. Kent Rochford, Acting Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology and Acting Director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST. He previously served as the Director of NIST Boulder Labs and Communications Technology Laboratory headquartered in Boulder, Colorado. Dr. Rochford received his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering at Arizona State University, his MBA from the University of Colorado, and his PhD in optical sciences from the University of Arizona. Our third witness is Mr. Seto Bagdoyan, Director of Forensic Audits at the U.S. Government Office, Accountability Office, GAO. Mr. Bagdoyan has previously served as the GAO Acting Director for Strategic Issues and as the Assistant Director for Congressional Relations at GAO. Mr. Bagdoyan received his bachelor's degree in International Relations and Economics from Claremont McKenna College and his MBA in Strategy from Pepperdine University. I now recognize Ms. Casias for 5 minutes to present her testimony.
Thank you, Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Byer, Chairman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. I am Lisa Casias, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Administration at the U.S. Department of Commerce. In this role, I oversee the Department's Office of Security and its functions and personnel. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Department's response to the Government Accountability Office report entitled Physical Security, NIST and Commerce Need to Complete Efforts to Address Persistent Challenges. Let me first thank GAO for its important work, which we will use to help strengthen security at NIST. I want the committee to know that the Department of Commerce shares the GAO's and this committee's concerns about physical security at NIST. The Department is proud of NIST's mission to promote U.S. innovation and industrial competitiveness through advancing measurement science, standards, and technologies in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. However, our highest priority is the safety of all of our staff, guest workers, and visitors. We have carefully reviewed the draft report, and I can tell you that the findings revealed shortcomings that are absolutely unacceptable. And I know that Dr. Rochford agrees. We take the GAO's findings seriously, and both the Department and NIST have agreed with all of the recommendations set forth in the report. NIST and the Department have already taken a number of steps to address the concerns raised in the report, and we are together planning more actions in the near and long term to close the gaps in security identified in the report. For example, the Department's Office of Security has already implemented a requirement that all security specialists conducting facility security assessments be certified in Interagency Security Committee Risk Management Process, or RMP standard. To date, 19 of our security specialist staff have successfully completed the ISC's RMP standard training, and all security specialists will be trained in early fiscal year 18. We have also scheduled new facility security assessments using those trained personnel at both campuses this fiscal year. Additionally, OSY has completed a draft chapter for the Department's Manual for Security Policies and Procedures that will align with the Department's risk management plan with the ISC's RMP standard. This chapter is currently in the review process within the Department. In addition to aligning the Department's risk management plan with ISC's RMP standard, this update incorporates all the recommended elements from the GAO report related to campus facility security committees, risk decision documentation, and alternative countermeasure recommendations. We are also, as the GAO has recommended, reviewing the security structure at NIST. This review involves all aspects of the relationship between OSY and NIST relating to personnel assets and security, and is part of a coordinated effort between the Department and NIST to determine the best approach. While there is no one-size-fits-all standard, we are reviewing all options available to us. These are only a few of the actions we have taken and are taking to ensure our campuses and facilities are secure and safe for our employees, guests, and others. I wanted to reiterate my appreciation to GAO for their thoughtful and thorough report. The Secretary and the Department are committed to ensuring that our actions in response to it are appropriate, effective, and correct. The security and safety of all of NIST and the Department's employees are of paramount importance to all of us. Thank you for this opportunity to address the report, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Dr. Rochford?
Chairman LaHood, Ranking Member Byer, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Member Lipinski, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Kent Rochford, the Acting Undersecretary of Commerce for Standards and Technology and the Acting Director of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss NIST and the Department's response to the recently released report by the GAO on physical security at NIST. I share the subcommittee's concerns about physical security at our campuses, and I thank you for your comments. I also appreciate your kind words about our programmatic successes, so thank you for that. I also appreciate the subcommittee's support of NIST's efforts to improve our security practices and to fully implement the recommendations in the report, with which we agree. NIST and the Department of Commerce are working to foster a positive security culture at both of our campuses, and the written testimony outlines the steps that we've already taken or plan to take to improve NIST security posture and ensure the successful implementation of the report's recommendations. The world-class research conducted at NIST needs world-class facilities to conduct that mission. But just as important, NIST needs robust, consistent adherence to standards for safety and physical security to ensure our people work in a safe environment and that our assets are protected. I am committed to working with our partners at the department to achieve this goal. As the acting director, it's my job to ensure the safety and security of our personnel, facilities, property information, and assets. And I take that responsibility very seriously. And that's why we are working together with the department's Office of Security to ensure that the security of NIST staff, my coworkers, can work safely and securely, and for establishing local campus security procedures designed to protect NIST assets. Moreover, NIST continues to work with the department's Office of Security to strengthen the security culture at NIST. The GAO notes that we have already had some success, though we also acknowledge there is still more work to be done. The GAO's report made 4 recommendations. NIST and the department agree with the full extent of these recommendations. Upon becoming acting director in January of this year, one of my first actions was to build on the foundational work started by Dr. May and the department's Office of Security and prioritize our activities through a security sprint. I considered it critically important to take the existing information we had, the knowledge we'd gained during the previous year, and prioritize our activities to move forward with implementation plans. The GAO pointed out the importance of improved communications with staff concerning physical security requirements and what should be expected of each employee. NIST agrees, and we have taken steps to improve our internal communications. We've developed an improved set of security requirements designed to provide an unambiguous understanding of the security responsibilities of all individuals who work at NIST. Last month, I met with senior NIST leadership and OSY to ensure that these requirements and expectations were fully understood. This afternoon, we will meet with the full complement of NIST management and supervisors to ensure that these security requirements and expectations are fully understood by all NIST leaders. And following that, I will hold all staff meetings to roll out these responsibilities and expectations and training requirements that all staff must meet. I also initiated the inclusion of a security element in all employee performance plans for this fiscal year, ensuring that security is afforded the same high level of importance in one's job performance as other elements. My intent is to work with OSY to drive a change towards a positive security culture. These efforts and others will help drive that change. Mr. Chairman, NIST has a history of tackling tough problems, from research challenges like developing the world's most atomic clock to internal challenges, such as addressing our safety culture. The dedicated people at NIST have committed themselves to working toward a common goal of achieving NIST's mission. We, along with OSY, are now in the midst of such an effort for physical security. I appreciate the subcommittee's interest in our ongoing work to improve the physical security of our campuses, and I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rochford. Now we'll move to our third witness, Mr. Bagdoyan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Johnson, Chairman LaHood, Chairwoman Comstock, Ranking Members Lipinski and Beyer, and members of the subcommittees. I'm pleased to appear before you today to discuss GAO's October 2017 report on NIST's physical security program. In recent years, incidents at each of its campuses in Gaithersburg and Boulder have raised questions about security vulnerabilities and NIST's ability to secure its facilities and their human, physical, and intellectual capital assets. In fiscal year 2017, NIST spent over $600 million on its campus laboratories that perform vital work in measurements, calibrations, and quality assurance techniques that help underpin much of U.S. commerce. Accordingly, this morning, I'll highlight 3 of our principal takeaways regarding NIST security at its campuses. First, we found that efforts to transform the physical security program at NIST have incorporated some key practices, particularly with regard to leadership commitment to organizational change. For example, though assessments in 2015 found issues with NIST security culture, we estimate that about 75% of personnel we recently surveyed believe that NIST leadership places great or very great importance on security issues. However, our agents gained unauthorized access to various areas at NIST campuses in Gaithersburg and Boulder. We can provide details about our unauthorized access efforts and certain survey results only during a closed session of this hearing. Additionally, our survey results showed personnel awareness about security responsibilities varied, in part because of the limited effectiveness of NIST security-related communication efforts. By incorporating elements of key practices, including a comprehensive communication strategy, interim milestone dates to measure progress, and measures to assess effectiveness, NIST will be better at position to address the security vulnerabilities caused by the varied levels of security awareness among employees. Second, management of NIST's physical security program is split between Commerce and NIST. This is inconsistent with the Federal Interagency Security Committee's physical security best practices, which encourage agencies to centrally manage physical security. Commerce is responsible for overseeing personnel who implement physical security policies, while NIST manages physical security countermeasures, such as access control technology, leading to fragmentation and responsibilities. Before implementing the current organizational structure in October 2015, neither Commerce nor NIST assessed whether it was the most appropriate way to fulfill NIST's physical security responsibilities. Without evaluating management options, the current organizational structure may be creating unnecessary inefficiencies, thereby inhibiting the effectiveness of the security program overall. Third, to help federal agencies protect and assess risks to their facilities, ISC developed a risk management process standard, also known as the RMP standard, with which federal agencies, including Commerce, generally must comply. Commerce and NIST most recently completed risk management steps for NIST campuses in 2015 and 2017, but we found that their efforts did not fully align with the standard. Neither Commerce nor NIST used a sound risk assessment methodology, fully documented key risk management decisions, or appropriately involved stakeholders, partly because these requirements were not in existing policy. Further, we found that Commerce and NIST had overlapping risk management activities, potentially leading to unnecessary duplication. According to officials, Commerce and NIST are separately drafting new risk management policies without ensuring that, one, these policies align with the RMP standard, and two, the NIST policy contains a formal mechanism to coordinate with Commerce. Future risk management activities may be limited in their usefulness and potentially duplicative. In closing, I'd underscore that this is essential for Commerce and NIST to place a high policy and operational priority on deploying preventative security controls to help mitigate the vulnerabilities we identified. Otherwise, should these vulnerabilities be exploited, NIST's human, physical, and intellectual capital will remain at risk. Fully and timely implementing our report's 4 recommendations, in addition to any other actions Commerce and NIST are taking independently, would be vital in this regard. To its credit, as both witnesses from Commerce have mentioned, the department has agreed to implement all of our recommendations. Chairman LaHood, Chairwoman Comstock, Chairman Smith, and Ranking Member Johnson, this concludes my remarks. I look forward to the subcommittee's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bagdoyan, and I want to thank all the witnesses for your valuable testimony here today. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes of questioning. I guess I want to first start off and say that I've had the opportunity to watch the 3 videos a couple times now, and watching them and observing them, my reaction is disturbing, alarming, particularly when you think about the work that goes on at the NIST campus in Boulder and in Gaithersburg. The sensitive work, the strategic work, the proprietary nature of what goes on at these facilities, much of what relates to national security. And so when I think about what procedures are being put in place now, I'm anxious to hear today those. And Mr. Bagdoyan, I was going to start with you. After learning of the incident involving the meth lab in July of 2015, you would think that there would be measures put in place that would prevent something like that or vulnerabilities from occurring. Today, after hearing what steps have been implemented in your recommendations, what can you tell us to assure the public that these vulnerabilities have been taken care of? And then secondly, are you confident that if you were to do another undercover operation in the next month here, that those would fail?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your questions. I'll take the first one, obviously, first. Based on what Dr. Rochford and Ms. Casias have mentioned, I think they are taking this seriously. That's good to know, and we look forward to receiving more details about what they plan on doing in response not only to our recommendations, but also the incident you mentioned. There's going to be a long-term effort. I think what they both described are promising first steps. We are probably playing a long game here in terms of getting things done. So that would be for the first question. The second question, it would definitely be speculative on my part to say whether or not anything that would be put in place would work. So I'll defer answering that one.
And what about reassurances that you can give to the public that this has been remedied?
Well, I can't say that it has been remedied. As I mentioned, these are first steps. They are promising. They are in the right direction. I'll hold the witnesses to their word that they are taking this seriously. They both outlined various steps that they are taking. Management attention and priority is key, as Dr. Rochford mentioned. Training is an absolute must. To have a security culture, you have to train your people to take it seriously. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. Dr. Rochford, similar to you, give us your assessment on what reassurances you can give to the American people here today that you've taken these recommendations into account and that you're implementing them and that the vulnerabilities are no longer there.
I agree with the committee that these breaches are unacceptable, and I do share your very, very deep concern. I also agree with my colleague from GAO. This is going to require a culture change. We have the responsibility, I have the responsibility for keeping NIST staff safe and secure. And we have a responsibility, as you noted, to secure the substantial investment that the taxpayers have made to build NIST what it is today. This breach, I agree, demonstrates the need for clear requirements, clear training, greater accountability. And we are undertaking all those steps. Last month, I met with all senior leadership for a 2-hour security summit where we described the needs for accountabilities. Later today, I actually meet with all managers at NIST. And then we're going to have all-hand staff security summits on both campuses that I will personally lead. We've developed training, and we'll have mandatory training for all 3,500 and the several thousand associates. So I do agree this is a bit of a long game. It's going to take time to have all this training done, but we will do it. And then I will personally ensure that the training is taken, and we will consider taking measures so we can understand the impact and the improvement in our security culture. As mentioned, we did undertake a security sprint that has developed a number of prioritized activities, some of which I can mention here, some we can discuss in closed session, but we do have an action plan to address a number of issues at NIST.
Can you talk a little bit about what you just mentioned there?
The security sprint? Yeah, what it did is it certainly pointed out that we have a leadership issue. Culture is driven by leadership, and I need to take that responsibility to change the culture. So we are developing training. We have what we call baseline requirements, which will be our first training set. We then have additional training for things like criminal behavior, action plans, or training for active shooter, other potential security issues. We have work where we're going to develop a security advisory board. We're going to have an executive security committee so we can engage leadership on programmatic changes to ensure the culture sticks. We've taken some specific engineering and access controls that I can talk about in closed session perhaps. We have a range of activities that we'll be undertaking over the year. When the new confirmed NIST director is on the job and starts, one of my first actions is my intent to brief him on these issues, show him the plans that we've undertaken, and with his permission, continue these actions.
Thank you, Dr. Rochford. I now yet recognize Mr. Byer for his questions.
Thank you, Chairman LaHood, very much. Mr. Bagdoyan, in the GAO report, you write about the fragmented approach to security, which, as a person interested in management and leadership for a long time, seems pretty nonsensical. You know, the too many cooks in the kitchen. You've got big commerce responsible for the outside piece, NIST responsible for the cameras and the locks. And how did this divided approach come about, and what can we do to fix it?
Well, thank you for your question, Mr. Byer. Well, I think in the first part, it originated back in late 2015, I believe, once NIST received, or Commerce received delegated authority for NIST police to act as federal law enforcement agents. So that was delegated by the Federal Protective Service. And then in 2017, the American Innovation and Competitiveness Act essentially directed Commerce to have an overall role in setting security policy and practice, but also NIST maintained its ability to perform its security-related duties as it saw fit, consistent with its culture that it was trying to build at that time. So in a very high level, that's the origin of the split. I would agree with you that having a split situation like this is not really consistent with best practice according to federal standards, and it does lead to inefficiencies, especially when the two parties really don't coordinate or collaborate. Sometimes it's fine to have two distinct streams of oversight over a major program like this, but if they don't talk with each other, they end up doing separate risk assessments and so forth. That is definitely counterproductive and hinders effectiveness overall.
Your perception, we'd probably need to amend that act in order to be able to centralize the security.
Well, that certainly would be one option. That would be up to Congress. It's certainly not for me to prescribe, but I think in the past it has been noted that in order to fix this, I believe one of the assessments that NIST did pointed out that the only remedy was a statutory fix. But on the other hand, we know of no plans to pursue such a fix at the department level.
Good, thanks. Dr. Rochford, I was in an embassy overseas for 4 years, and every night the Marines would go office to office and look at the stuff on everyone's desk. And if someone had classified material out, there was a report the next morning. And no one wanted to have a report, which came back to Washington. Is there any reporting program like that at Boulder or in Gaithersburg? Whether it's a guard who let somebody in who shouldn't have been let in with a bad badge, or papers left out on desks that shouldn't have been let out.
We do have incident reporting on both campuses that then bubble up through our police staff, which are managed by OSY, to the director's office. For example, I know that in Boulder, the doors are checked nightly, and they provide a report of any issues that then can be addressed either through maintenance or through personnel action.
When you mentioned that you've built security into the employee performance plans?
Yes.
Is this tied to incident reporting then?
Right now, it addresses the baseline security requirements. The baseline security requirements do address reporting incidents of tailgating, piggybacking, things of that nature.
Have you figured out a way to keep paragliders from landing on your campuses?
That might have some technology solutions that we've not addressed.
Okay. And Ms. Casias, in your oversight role, do you envision a way for you at OSY to be able to provide the necessary oversight of the security that NIST provides without necessarily having to own half of it directly?
Congressman, we recognize, and Dr. Rochford and I have talked about this, we recognize that the security management structure does require some evaluation. And we agree with GAO. We've accepted their recommendation. So I think we do have work in that area. We've already started some steps. We've identified executive sponsors. Myself and Del Brockett, the Associate Director for Management Resources at NIST, will lead that endeavor. We've selected internal teams. We're also looking at using outside security experts, such as folks from the ISC, to help us in that matter. And in our review, we'll be looking at roles, responsibility, and accountability, and how that impacts security. So I think there's a mix. There's not one size fits all, and we know that the Boulder campus is different from the Gaithersburg campus. So we will be working jointly, but we do agree that this is an item that we do need to look at and is a serious item that needs attention immediately.
This Colorado people are always high maintenance. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Byer. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Smith, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bagdoyan, let me address my first question to you, and that is, how much confidence do you have that the GAO's recommendations will be implemented by NIST?
Good question. I really believe this. I am confident that based on what I've heard this morning, certainly in its official response to our draft report, that Commerce and NIST are taking this seriously, and they'll take the necessary action.
I mentioned in my opening statement that unauthorized access was attempted by the GAO at both campuses 15 times, and 15 times they were successful. It just seems incredible that that would be the case, but to what do you attribute that other than just lax security? And is there any excuse for that? I don't know where to go with that.
I take your point, Mr. Chairman. I'll probably be best served to respond to that in a closed session.
And as I understand it, it's the Department of Commerce that came up with the designation law enforcement sensitive. Is that right?
That's correct. They are the marking agency in this case.
And Ms. Casias, I'd like to ask you about that designation, law enforcement sensitive. Why did you choose to apply that to the 3 videos that members saw in closed session before we opened it up for this hearing?
We believe in viewing the videos, which I have viewed, and so has Dr. Rochford, that there are security vulnerabilities that other folks could look at and use those vulnerabilities within our facilities or other federal facilities.
What
And
is
in
the-
addition, I'd be more than happy in any closed session that we could get into that in a little bit more detail. So
What is the definition of law enforcement sensitive?
The definition is that it's the sensitivity, if that came out, would cause some issues with security within our campuses.
Okay, can you give me, do you happen to have the exact definition with you?
I do not have that with me, but I can get that.
If you can get that fairly quickly, that would be helpful. My suspicion is that you all may be overly cautious. Having seen the videos, they're pretty obvious as to what might cause breaches and what did cause breaches in this case, and I don't think it's revealing much to acknowledge that. In fact, it may even be helpful. So I'd like to see the exact definition and see what the rationale was for applying it in these cases.
Absolutely.
And I might even ask you to go back and take another look, because while you want to err on the side of caution, you also don't want to prevent information that can and should be seen by others from being considered by others as well. Let me go, Director Rochford, ask you a couple of questions to the extent that you can answer them, and that is just generally what can be done to prevent some of these unauthorized accesses. I know you responded to the chairman. Generally, if you want to elaborate on that, I think that would be helpful.
So if we're talking about the specifics in the video, I mean, generally, we see security as a layered approach. So we need to have both improved training and an improvement in our security force that does their checks. But the other layer is the employees. And part of what I need to do is make sure that NIST staff have a much greater awareness about these concerns. Know at some level, you know, how these things can be spoofed, for example. And through training, and I think this awareness, we can have them also do a better job of making the appropriate checks to ensure security and avoid breaches.
Right. And I assume improvements have already been made to security in the last several weeks?
When I started, the security plan actually became operational over the last couple months. So we have developed training materials, we have video training materials. We have a number of things that I'll be launching very soon.
Okay.
So yes, we're ready to,
Would the security measures that have been implemented recently have prevented the unauthorized access that has occurred in the past?
I think that preventing those unauthorized access I think the training is going to be a key part of that, and the training is going to take some time. So we have not put in place something that would cause 100% improvement.
What has been put in place, would you guess, would prevent most of the unauthorized access from occurring?
We have there's some items that I could discuss in closed session.
Okay, I'm not asking you what those items are. I'm just asking you generally to say whether or not you feel that what's already been implemented would prevent most of the unauthorized access that has occurred in the past.
I think we put things in place to improve the situation. I do not have confidence that I could say we have 100%.
Okay,
in
thank you
place.
very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you. Ms. Casias, your office oversees the Commerce Office of Security, which manages the Police Services Group. The Director of Security for NIST provided a letter to the Science Committee on September 14th of this year that the Police Services Group in both Colorado and Maryland had a total of 41 authorized staff with 5 current vacancies under the existing operating budget. Can you tell us what sort of impact you believe current budget constraints have on NIST security posture, and what can we in Congress do to help in that regard?
Congressman, thank you for that question. As we said, security is not one size fits all, and while we have our police force, our police services group, we also have contracted staff, which we have supplemented that workforce with. At this point, I believe, looking at our risks and our vulnerabilities, we are working within our budget and believe that we have adequate funding. As we work through the evaluation and look at the different responsibilities between NIST and the department, we will look, and if there is anything there, we'll identify and work with this committee on those findings.
I want to ask Dr. Rochford or Mr. Bagdoyan, do you agree with that in terms of having enough resources?
At this point, we've gone through our security sprint and have identified a number of activities that we can make. I currently believe I have the resources to take on that first tranche of activities. So at this time, I believe we have the resources.
Mr. Bagdoyan, do you have any?
Yes, thank you,
Thoughts on
Mr. Lipinski. I would answer in terms of the resourcing level is a function of the risk and the countermeasures already in place and anticipated. So a precise number that would drive a budget is obviously a function of that, and I would defer to the department in their view on that matter.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bagdoyan, part of the GAO examination of NIST security included a survey of NIST employees, which you had talked about in your testimony. My understanding is that the sample for the survey was exclusively technical and scientific staff. Is that true? And if so, why were other staff omitted from the survey pool?
Yes, that is correct, Mr. Lipinski. We surveyed approximately 500, which is a projectable sample, and a determination of what to include and what not to include was essentially a methodological one. We can provide you with additional detail separately, if you like, in terms of how we arrived at that.
Was there a reason that the administrative staffers were not included in that?
Well, I don't recall the specifics, but I would say that we chose to focus on people who would likely encounter potential intruders and others during the course of their duties.
Yeah, but it would seem like anyone coming into the gate would be someone who potentially would have the possibility of letting someone in who shouldn't be in there.
Yeah, I take your point, but
Okay.
we just chose what we chose, and I can certainly provide a more detailed explanation on the methodology separately.
Okay, you said 75% in the survey said that they take security. I forget what were the exact.
Yes, let me look at my cheat sheet here. It says about 3/4 of scientific and technical employees believe that NIST leadership places great or very great importance on physical security issues.
Is that 75% enough?
Well, optimally, you would want it to be 100%. That goes back to my earlier point that if you want the culture to improve, the awareness to improve, and be optimal, you really need to be at a very, very high level for this to work. Otherwise, a single weak point, single individual who might not get it is a potential vulnerability.
Well, it sounds like there's good work being done. Certainly need to follow up, and the culture, I think, is certainly going to be a big issue. Just very briefly, do you think there's any? Is it possible that the type of people who would be working, the technical people who would be working at NIST, are people who are used to more open circumstances, campuses, things like that, that do not require the type of security, and that could be a reason why?
It's certainly a possibility, but again, with proper training, leadership emphasis, you move the needle in the direction it needs to go. And awareness is key. Prioritization from leadership is key, as is getting stakeholders, for example, on the Boulder campus. There are other agencies that share the space to get them involved as well, because their culture would be also impacted. So that's a key point.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lipinski. I now recognize Mr. Marshall of Kansas for his questions.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman LaHood. First question for Mr. Rochford. In the military or in business, when we have a big goal, a big vision, we typically set out a timeline with major events, major milestones. So our goal here, obviously, I would assume we have all the same goal, better security in these facilities. Do you have a timeline? Where are we on that timeline? Where's it going?
Our security sprint did set out a timeline for phase one for this training, this outreach, the accountabilities. That timeline has various things happening that I've mentioned, with our goal to have complete mandatory training, for example, by the end of the calendar year.
Okay. Can we have access to that, perhaps? Would that be a reasonable question?
Access to the
timeline, or?
Certainly. I don't have it with me, but I can provide that.
Okay, thanks. I want to go back to the plutonium incident at the NIST facility in Boulder, Colorado. I guess that's several years ago. Obviously, it created some significant challenges to not just the facility, but the surrounding people as well. And now we're aware of another incident at the same facility. Do you feel like you've done everything possible to shore up that situation there for such another dangerous event? Obviously, there's some pretty toxic things going on there.
Plutonium was a wake-up call for NIST. That was the moment we realized that our safety culture was not what it needed to be. In the past, we'd worked on what is considered an expert culture, where we trusted our highly trained individuals to take on safety. What we recognized is we needed to take this more deeply. We needed to have specific training, specific processes, specific access controls and procedures. As a result, I could state that we have a very assertive safety culture now, and in fact, that's what I'm modeling our changes in the security culture towards. In fact, that specific event, we basically met all the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's requirements satisfactorily. We've made great strides in our safety program, both in radioactive materials and safety in general, and I think, yes, our safety program is much more robust.
I'm just curious, the people that are doing the research, the scientists, are they the ones ultimately in charge of this security, figuring out what to, I mean, I'm guessing it's two different people. My doctors are not real, the surgeons are not real good at figuring out what to do in the ER. So I'm hoping it's different people than the scientists trying to figure out a security program for the facility.
No, so the way we operate is we obviously have a management structure. I, as the acting director, have responsibility for security. We can gather scientific input. So, for example, when we assess a space, as the chairman had mentioned, we may have proprietary information. We may have other information. We gather that from the scientists so we can understand what sort of safety and/or security protocols to put in place. Those then are developed in programs that follow guidelines created by both the Department's Office of Security and then the local controls that we have in place.
Okay, my last question, going back to Boulder. There's still no external barrier in Boulder, as I understand it. Do you feel like that's a problem? And why is it, I mean, that would seem to me to be more of an immediate solution to unauthorized access to restricted areas, or some type of a physical external barrier. Do you think it's necessary, or why haven't we done it, or is that a waste of time and effort, money?
I would not characterize it a waste of time and effort. When I started in January and undertook the security sprint, my goal was to be able to get quick wins, to be able to do things that we could take action on quickly. A fence in Boulder, it's going to be a multi-stakeholder process. There's a number of factors and considerations, including both the city, the neighbors, local government, issues of that nature. There's environmental aspects. It's something that will take a longer time.
You know, that just drives me crazy to think about that here's an immediate danger, and we're not in the process, the rules, the regulations, and again, having built a hospital facility, I know what it's like. It just takes months and years to go through the process, and in the meanwhile, we can't get to the real solution. So I look forward to going through those weeds as quick as you can and making these places secure. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. I now yield to the ranking member, Ms. Johnson, for her questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a rather puzzling to me when you put everything on training. What was the initial training when people were hired? I mean, do you have any standards of ethical standards for them to have a commitment? Yes.
We do have onboarding training. In retrospect, the onboarding training has been rather simplistic. You know, wear your badge. What I need to do is develop, and we have done this, we've developed training that's very explicit, very unambiguous, and actually includes various scenarios so people know precisely what we mean and what we expect. So I think in the past we just had not done training that was sufficiently detailed, and that will be is being remedied.
You know, I'm having a hard time. I fully support the work of NIST. And I looked at the recommendations that GAO has recommended. But I'm having a very hard time understanding what changes were made, or what kind of approaches did you make after these incidences? It seems very, very loose to me in a very important area. Do you feel capable of running this agency and keeping the activities at a professional level?
Yes, I do. I've been in this role since January, so I've had a limited span here that I could do these things. Since 2015, we have added several engineering access controls. We did increase security staffing. We did establish this NIST Security Advisory Board. But there is more to do, and that's what I've been working on over the last many months. And I'm confident when our new director joins us that he'll be interested in moving this forward as well.
When you say there's much more to do, give me an idea of what else is to do, that you have in mind to do.
In addition to training, I mean, this is a culture change, in my opinion. So it requires a leadership commitment that's consistent and persistent, right? We need to continually meet with staff. We need to demand that the training requirements are met. I need to hold my management accountable. My management needs to hold the employees accountable. We basically have to change an attitude so that we're doing this in the best possible way. We've done it in safety. We know how to do this, but we also know it takes time and it takes real commitment. So I have the commitment. We just need some time.
Okay, Ms. Casias, do you have any comments?
Yes, I agree with Dr. Rochford that it is a culture change, but I also believe as we're working together, we need to look at the management structure. That is a priority for us. We also, as I had stated, we now have all of our staff trained on the ISC RMP standards, and I think looking and working with those facility assessments and getting those re-looked at this year, redone, and looking at that jointly, I think it really is critical that we have that open communication and working together, and I believe we do. We've talked about a lot of trainings today, and those are not just the NIST folks working on that. Our Director of Security, who is on campus at NIST, has been working, and yesterday just had one of the security days with a fabulous turnout from the staff, and that was a joint effort in working together and looking at what we need to do. So there's more to do than training, and I believe we're on that path and we're working towards that, and I'm confident that our partnership together, we will get there.
Have you looked at these? Are you following the recommendations of GAO?
Absolutely. We have already started. As I noted, we've already put together, both myself and Del Brockett, who's in the room, we're going to be spearheading this in the executive sponsors. We've actually worked on other projects in the department before this, and we've been successful, and I know that we'll be successful in this one. And it's a priority. Security is a priority for the department, for our people, for our assets, and our information.
Well, thank you. I know that security is very important, but I'm talking about the ethical behavior of the people within a security measure as well.
I agree, and I think looking, and there's been some steps of initiating some security measures in people's performance plans, but we are looking at into the incidents that folks have seen on the videos and determining. We've done appropriate counseling to date, and we're working with the appropriate offices on what other steps we need to take.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hill.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I now recognize Mr. Norman from South Carolina.
Thank you. Dr. Rochford, I guess as a follow-up to Chairman Smith's question about the 15 attempts and you had 15 breaches, and you mentioned that if they occur today, you could give 100% guarantee that it would prevent it. What percentage would you give?
That would be difficult to assess. At this point, because we haven't rolled out the training, I don't think some of the early steps that need to be taken have occurred. The training, I will have the meetings with management this afternoon. And again, these have been planned for some time. I'll have meetings with all staff. At that point, we'll roll out the required training. My belief is as people take the training and we're holding them accountable, we'll see improvements.
Okay. Now, I also understand that in Gaithersburg, Maryland campus has a new nuclear reactor on site. Is that true?
That's correct.
NIST stores caches of radioactive material for testing. Is that true?
Testing and standards, measurement standards, correct.
Do you realize you can Google this and get this on site? You don't see this as a security risk?
Some of this will be known because of Nuclear Regulatory Commission postings. So yes, it is known. In addition, our nuclear reactor, excuse me, is a Center for Neutron Research, which is a center that uses neutrons to do measurements, and therefore we interact with industry and academia. So they do know about it as well.
Okay, and another question, Doctor. According to the Washington Post, in August of this year, an NIST employee was exposed to an unsafe dose of radiation. And according to this article, as of September 27th, it's still unknown how the container of the radioactive material was compromised. Have they found anything out on that?
Yes, we've learned a great deal in that incident. The material is known as americium. It was held in a small 50 milliliter ampule. We received it from an energy lab about 17 years ago. It was in solution, and as the radioactivity occurred, these decay particles caused what they call radiolysis, created a gas, and over time, the gas overpressured and the ampule exploded. So what in fact happened was not a mishandling event, but we keep these in these lead storage containers, and the material burst. We found it during a routine radiation testing, a survey program that we have, where we look at these spaces weekly. And then when we found it, we could put controls in place, and then we had to test all the individuals who have been in contact with the material before the breach was, or before the dispersion was noted. We're very aggressive in our reporting in safety, so we immediately went to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and we provided a notification that had worst-case scenarios. What we've learned since, as we've been able to do more testing, both of the material and the bioassay, we believe that the individuals involved have not had exposures above the regulatory limits, that they've actually been below the regulatory limits. These measurements are actually quite difficult. These are alpha emitters, which are very, very faint. So it took some time for us to get the measurements. But we have engaged with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at great length and with the Department of Energy. And there, in fact, the 30-day report to the NRC went out Saturday. So that's a public document.
Okay, well, I joined Congressman Johnson, I guess, and the concern I have is that y'all are taking it seriously, and particularly with the taxpayer dollars that are going toward this, that I see it's a leadership problem, but it still has got to be some consequences to it. So I would ask you to put this at the top of your list to get fixed, and not just addressed, but to get fixed, because 15 to 15 breaches is unacceptable in my mind. I yield.
I agree.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Bonamitri of Oregon, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Rochford and Ms. Casias, NIST now has, it's my understanding, your full-time equivalent police officers, about 28 in Maryland and 13 in Colorado, but you also use contract protective security officers. So can you talk a little bit about what they do? Where are they stationed? At the gates, at the doors? And what training do they get? And what is the turnover among those contracted protective security officers?
Thank you for your question. I will have to get back to you on the turnover. I don't have that information with me immediately. But all of our contractors are required to have certain standards. We do provide training, and I can tell the folks on this panel that we have provided training since the penetration issues that we've had, and we'll continue to have that training with those folks.
How does their training compare to for example, the police officer training?
I would have to get back to you on the exact distinctions between the both, but in the case of providing the security services, both parties, the police services group and the officers, the contract force, receive the same training, and everyone that is responsible for that understands that it is totally unacceptable with the breaches and what has happened.
Thank you. I would appreciate the follow-up on the turnover among those contracted officers. The 2015 incident, which we've all heard about with the NIST employee who was a NIST police officer trying to make meth. Now that, of course, is a rare type of situation, but what recommendations are you making now that would have prevented that particular incident, as opposed to your recommendations to keep out unauthorized access? I mean, this person was a NIST employee, so what specific recommendations would have prevented that? Ms. Casias or Dr. Rochford?
I obviously was not in my position when that occurred, but I know we have looked at how we're using rovers, how we're using our police force and our guards and our actual police force that's on site.
But he was a police officer, so
I agree.
What would have prevented that at the time? What are you doing now that would have prevented that?
I believe how we are running our shifts and looking at our shifts, that may have prevented it. I'll have to get back to you if they're, on exact measures that we may have taken.
Thank you. Mr. Bagdoyan, the GAO report notes inefficiencies, plural, that arise from the fragmented organizational structure of NIST security. An example mentioned in the report was that NIST is responsible for procuring and placing the security cameras, but the Department of Commerce is overseeing the police personnel and the facilities, and that led to some of the security cameras being placed in locations that weren't particularly useful or helpful for the police. So number one, what are some of the other inefficiencies, because you said inefficiencies, and that was one example. And then also, how could that have been prevented? It seems like maybe a simple phone call could have said, could have remedied that by saying, you know, the cameras aren't in the right place. So how did that happen? And maybe I can get Ms. Casias and Dr. Rochford to respond as well.
Sure. I'll let my fellow panelists here respond from their perspectives. In terms of placement of equipment and so forth, I certainly wouldn't venture there in an open hearing. But in terms of other inefficiencies, you have risk assessments that are done separately, for example. So that is a core function that at least should be coordinated, if not collaborated on.
And I see Dr. Rochford nodding his head, so I'm assuming that NIST agrees with that.
Right. So that's right. So that I would just leave it at that. That's a key inefficiency, and also crafting different policies at times, parallel security policies is another area of inefficiency that, at a minimum, should be much more closely coordinated.
Thank you. And I don't want to interrupt, but I want Dr. Rochford and Ms. Casias to respond to how could that have been remedied? Is there some channel better channel for communication where if the cameras are put in the wrong place, why wasn't that immediately fixed?
That should have been immediately fixed. I don't know what line of communication dropped and why that didn't occur. On our campuses, our cameras and other access controls are not used purely for security as well. We do have some that are put in for safety reasons, and it could be that security personnel were concerned that they may not have had appropriate access, but those were done for programmatic reasons. As far as coordination, our Security Advisory Board does have our local OSY Director of Security at NIST on that board. So when we do develop local policies, this individual is involved and weighs in. So we have worked to coordinate to ensure that we have the right amount of overlap.
Thank you, and I see my time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now yield to Mr. Laudermilk of Georgia for his questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the panelists for all being here today. As has been mentioned, I'm sure many times in the last few months, and even here today, the incident with the police officer who was cooking meth in one of the laboratories is interesting. It was last year, or in the last Congress, I was chair of the Oversight Committee here, subcommittee, and we were investigating this instance, and it was during that investigation when we actually uncovered the plutonium incident. In fact, it was an email. The question was, why wasn't Congress notified of the meth explosion? And an email we uncovered between two senior level people was, well, we didn't notify Congress about the plutonium incident either, and it was 1,000 times worse. So I'm just bringing that up to say I hope that the communications with Congress is going to drastically improve with instances. But I want to direct my questions to our response, Congress's response regarding security issues that have transpired at NIST. Last year, I sponsored the NIST Campus Security Act, which ultimately was incorporated into the American Innovation Competitiveness Act, which was signed into law back in January. Now, according to the GAO report, physical security at NIST was split between the Office of Security and NIST, and the American Innovative Competitiveness Act directs the Secretary of Commerce to oversee law enforcement at NIST by establishing the NIST Director of Security. I understand that has been fulfilled, that position. Are we seeing that with this new position, the new director is closing the gaps that existed in security between the two offices? Dr. Rochford?
Yes, I would agree, and I think one activity is the Security Advisory Board in which he works. We also have weekly meetings between the Office of Security's Director of Security at NIST and our Emergency Services Office Director every week, so we can make sure that day-to-day issues are dealt with. I would like to note, in terms of the plutonium incident, I wasn't in this job
yes,
at the time. However, NIST would never keep things from the Oversight Committee. And that incident, in fact, did have extensive hearings at the time. So we were very forthcoming and did inform Congress during that incident as well.
Mr. Bagdoyan, I know that the bill that I was referencing assigns GAO to conduct a study evaluating the performance of NIST police service groups. Have you been able to assess the improvements or the performance that we've seen out of security since the new director has been put into place?
Well, not really. I mean, basically what our work consisted of was testing what was in place at the time. Obviously, having a director in place is important, but what we're testing is the reality on the ground. So director has to make things happen on the ground for us to be able to go back at some point at congressional direction, of course, to take another look and see how things have changed.
Okay. Now, of course, we don't want to get into areas that are sensitive to reveal anything in this session, but I don't know the exact time frame of the videos that we saw earlier.
Sure.
But if those occurred within the past year, I still have concerns that we have not made strides in the right direction.
Right.
Is there still a lot of improvement that needs to be done?
Yes, we can certainly try and address that point, Mr. Loudermilk, in a closed session.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Rochford, do you agree that we still have a lot of area that needs to be covered?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And as I'd mentioned, a lot of this is driven by culture, and that we can change.
Okay, thank you. Since I have a few more seconds, Mr. Bagdoyan, in your testimony, you described overlapping risk management activities. To what extent did you witness duplicative activities, and what are the consequences of such duplication?
Well, witnessing obviously is performing the assessments themselves, then devising security policies that are at least in part derived from those assessments. If they're not sufficiently coordinated, essentially collaborated on, then you might end up having two different lines of thinking in terms of what is risky and what the countermeasures are and what resources are needed to be developed, devoted to those countermeasures.
Thank you. And Dr. Rochford, understand this, you're inheriting a lot of the problems that existed, and just my final question, do you have a plan in place to reduce the duplication between the two?
Yes, in fact, much of what I think was seen as duplication was in fact coordination. We've often started our work using from documents derived from the Office of Security. As a manager, I do have to make some resource allocation decisions. So clearly, those are things I can do in conjunction with the Office of Security. But we do that through coordination with our Security Advisory Board, which does have OSY and NIST personnel.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. At this time, we recognize Mr. Perlmutter for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Bagdoyan, how often does the GAO conduct kind of investigations like this where you do, I mean, kind of sting operations, if you will? I'm familiar with TSA operations where sometimes you go in and see if you can sneak through the security there. How often do you guys do this?
Well, they do take a lot of time to develop and implement. Of course, all of our investigative work is derived from congressional requests, so we do get them periodically. You're absolutely right about TSA and the transport sector overall. We have done, as you may know, in the past, work looking at the Affordable Care Act and its enrollment controls. I testified on that on several occasions in recent years. We most recently completed work on the FCC's Lifeline program, where we used undercover resources to attempt to enroll into the program, and we were mostly successful. So it basically runs the gamut. Again, it's driven by congressional interest and request. So we play in various different spaces, and I would point out that no one investigation is the same as another. They're all very unique.
Thank you. So Dr. Marshall is from Kansas, and he had questions, Dr. Rochford, about the Boulder campus and putting up a fence. So just listening to this, I think you've got to bifurcate between safety and security. They're two different things. So the plutonium was a safety issue. It wasn't like somebody was stealing it. But the security issue is you have a guy roaming around the campus through an open window, for goodness sakes, for hours before anybody discovered him. So I don't know about putting a fence up in Boulder. That's going to take forever to get something like that done, but you certainly can harden the security for each building. What steps are you taking on that?
That's absolutely correct, and we have taken a number of steps in that regard. We've added additional engineering controls at the perimeters of the buildings. We've improved internal alarming in areas where we have windows of that nature. In fact, it wasn't an open window. What it was a temporary window in which we were doing laser experiments on the mesa. So it was easily broken. Now that's, well, there's other things we can, yeah, that's been fixed, and we can talk about details.
All right, but let's talk about the plutonium for just a second. And obviously, in our area, we've dealt with issues pertaining to plutonium with Rocky Flats and all of that. I guess just as a neighbor of this laboratory, I wasn't aware that you guys were a storage facility. You're a laboratory. And to the degree that you are a storage facility, I hope that that's part of the approach you're taking, and I'd say to Commerce as well, that should be going to the Department of Energy or somebody else. You can react to that if you will.
So in fact, we are not a storage facility. In that particular instance, we had an exceedingly small quantity of plutonium that was being used to measure sensors and detectors that were going to be used for non-proliferation activities. However, there is no exceedingly small amount of plutonium, so we had to manage it very carefully. Since then, we have only in Boulder used what are known as sealed sources. Now, in Gaithersburg, where we have a radiation physics division, we do have a number of sources, and these are used as measurement standards to calibrate things as diverse as, radionuclides for medicine to things for non-proliferation for other activities.
So now I'm going to get on my political high horse for a second. I mean, obviously, I'm listening to my friends on the Republican side of the aisle talk about radiation and these small amounts and the danger that comes from it. And I would just say, as I just did in the Financial Services Committee, the president just openly talking about nuclear arms and building the stockpiles and all of that stuff, there's real danger there. And we all know that. And that rhetoric is dangerous. And so with that, I yield back to the chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Perlmutter. I now recognize Mr. Higgins of Louisiana for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bagdoyan, as Director for the GAO's Forensics Audits and Investigative Services, I thank you for your service to your country, sir.
Thank you.
Looking at your bio, you have an extensive background in security, critical infrastructure protection, risk management, and homeland security. Would you concur that you're an accomplished investigator?
I would like to think so.
One would like to think so. My background is in law enforcement, sir. Would you also agree that it's just human nature that over time, if there's been no critical incident, there develops sort of a relaxed culture of security at entry and perimeter security? Would you concur that that's generally true in security?
It's possible that over time that
Thank
happens
you.
if you don't pay attention.
However, given the incidents of July of 2015 and April of 2016, those security breaches, wouldn't, as an experienced and accomplished law enforcement professional and security expert, wouldn't you concur that the heightened awareness should have existed by the time your agents began your undercover probes?
That would be a logical response, yes.
And it was your team that conducted the security evaluation of NIST. Is that correct?
Yes, my investigative colleagues performed that work. Yes.
How many individuals made up the team of GAO undercover staff?
That I will defer answering until a closed session.
I understand. Was there more than one? More than one agent?
I'll reserve on that one. Thanks.
Your one or potentially more than one were quite successful, though, were they not?
That's what the record shows, yes.
At any point during the course of your undercover investigation, did the GAO agents have potential access, or were they in the close vicinity of a NIST computer?
I'll have to defer answering that, sir. Sorry.
Were they in a building where computers existed?
Same answer.
Would your staff have had the opportunity to insert a thumb drive on one of these perhaps non-existent computers, thereby infecting the system with a virus?
I'll defer answering that.
Did your staff have access to laboratories?
Same answer.
So in these buildings that your staff was able to enter, is it reasonable to presume that there were officers with computers and perhaps laboratories, given the fact that that's why these buildings exist?
Well, that's what NIST exists for, so that's a safe
It would
assumption.
be a reasonable presumption, would it not?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that a deranged individual wandered around the Boulder, Colorado NIST campus and required medical attention because he accessed an area which houses toxic chemicals?
That's my understanding of the incident. I don't know whether he was deranged or not, but he certainly didn't belong where he was.
Is the Boulder facility fenced?
It is not.
Thank you. Were there any mechanisms in place to warn the guards that this individual was present, an alarm system or something of that nature?
I don't know.
Did the folks on the ground at Boulder know how long this gentleman, what was the duration of time that he wandered undetected?
I don't know, Mr. Higgins.
Mr. Chairman, we have reviewed videos of the GAO undercover staff conducting testing of the physical security of these campuses. And I respectfully submit that the department has considered this sensitive information and not appropriate for the public to see. But as an experienced former law enforcement officer, these videos do show evidence of repetitive failures of the security in place at these facilities and the need for substantial improvement from NIST and the department. And I respectfully submit that these videos should be made public so that NIST be held accountable by the broader public, by we the people, and by the taxpayers that we represent, as opposed to just the members of this committee. And with that, I respectfully yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Higgins, for your questions. And I think that concludes all the questions from committee members at this time. Let me just, in closing, thank you for being here and for your valuable testimony. I think collectively, both Republicans and Democrats here today have expressed concern for what went on here with these three breaches. And are going to be watching and monitoring to make sure that the implementation of the suggestions are put through, and that we do everything we can to make sure that these facilities are secure and safe moving forward. I would also ask that there was a number of requests made by members here today, that those be followed up by the witnesses. And the record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. Pursuant to House Rule 11G2 and the previous vote of the subcommittees, the remainder of the hearing will be closed to the public because of the disclosure of the testimony may compromise sensitive law enforcement information. The clerk will clear the room. Only members of Congress, their staff, and witnesses may remain in the room. Once that's done, we'll begin the executive session. Yeah, exactly.